It is March 17th, 2022. We're here at the Tempe History Museum with Grady Gammage Jr. Thank you so much for being here.
Nice to be here.
And we start out with the easy questions like when and where were you born?
So I was born in Phoenix in Good Samaritan Hospital on McDowell on October 1st, 1951.
And when did your family move to Tempe or settle in Tempe, become connected to Tempe?
So I will back up and give you the longer version.
Sure.
My father was from Arkansas, graduated from high school in Prescott, Arkansas. I've always wondered whether they say Prescott or Prescott like
There,
we do.
yeah.
I don't know. I've never been to Prescott or Prescott, Arkansas. He graduated, must have been 1913 maybe from high school? No, I don't know. In that range. He was a very good student in high school, and he was told that he had tuberculosis and needed to move to a drier climate. And so he wrote to the governor of the newly formed state of Arizona, the governor being George W.P. Hunt, the guy buried in the little white pyramid.
Yeah.
And it's an odd notion that you would bury the governor of the state in a pyramid. Very peculiar. And his family are there as well. Governor Hunt writes him back personally. My father writes to say, is there a university in the new state of Arizona that I can enroll in? George W.P. Hunt writes him back and says, yes, you look like a good student. I have admitted you. The university is in Tucson. Bring this letter and they'll let you in. It was a more casual time. My father borrows money from the owner of the sawmill where he was working. It's the way I've always heard the story in Prescott, Arkansas. And came out and enrolled at the U of A. He graduates from the U of A in 1917 or 18, I think, and is selected to be the first Rhodes Scholar from the state of Arizona. Turns it down to go back to Arkansas and marry his high school English teacher.
Oh. They're going to say sweetheart.
Now, this is Dixie Gammage. There's a building at ASU named Dixie Gammage. I never knew any of this story until I was probably in junior high school. And I came home one day and I said to my mother, this is after my father's death, there's this building called Dixie Gammage. What is the deal? To which my mother responds, I guess I should tell you the story. That was your father's first wife. I had no clue before that. So anyway, he goes back to Arkansas. He marries Dixie, brings her back to Arizona. He's at some point in there pronounced cured of the tuberculosis, and looks for a job in Arizona. I think he was a star debater when he was at the U of A and wanted to be a lawyer. Both of my parents wanted to be lawyers. Neither one became a lawyer, so I felt compelled. It was my legacy was to go to law school. I believe his first job out of the U of A was to become a spokesman for the temperance movement in Arizona, going around making speeches against the evils of demon rum. This was apparently one of Dixie's causes. And she had gotten in this job. And there's a biography of him that goes through this in greater detail, presumably with more accuracy than I'm relating it. Some of the story was in Reader's Digest back in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he goes around the state making speeches on behalf of temperance. Now, my recollections of my father, which are not real clear, I was only 8 years old when he died, have to do with having a cocktail in the evening. So I think this was a job. I don't think this was a cause for him, like it apparently was for Dixie. And after he does that for a while, he then takes a job teaching high school in Winslow. In pretty short order, he becomes principal of the high school in Winslow. I think there's a period in there where he does a stint as the superintendent of the high school. Why you would need both a principal and superintendent is unclear to me. I don't think there are multiple high schools in Winslow in the 1920s. And moves from there to becoming president of Arizona State Teachers College in Flagstaff. So he becomes president at ASTC Flagstaff in about 1926. I don't really understand where in there exactly he got a master's degree. I mean, these ASTC, these were teachers' colleges in those days, and they didn't have the academic expectations we have today about NAU and ASU. At some point, he winds up getting an EDD. He did not have a PhD. He got an EDD from New York University. Apparently by mail order, near as I can tell. I'm again unclear as to how that happened exactly. But anyway, he's at NAU and he turns out to be very good at working the state legislature. And increases the funding and the stature of ASTC Flagstaff. It had been, I think, after he got out of the U of A, when he went to the U of A, Rufus B. von Kleinschmidt was the president of the U of A. And von Kleinschmidt was a legendary figure in American education in those days, and ultimately became president of USC and turned USC into a significant, important university. And so my father had sort of wanted to follow in von Kleinschmidt's footsteps, and his goal had been to be the president of the U of A. But because of his success in the legislature, he is recruited to come to Tempe and become president of ASTC Tempe. So when he becomes president of Tempe, he doesn't give up Flagstaff. He's president of both institutions for a while. So between 26 and 33, I think are the right dates, he's president of Flagstaff. And he comes to Tempe in 32 and it takes over as president here, and then ultimately gives up Flagstaff. At some point, and we talk more about this in more detail, gives up his ambition to be president of the U of A, partly because of the bitterness between ASU and the U of A in those days, the fight over the medical school being the biggest piece of that bitterness, and partly because I think he comes to realize that Phoenix is going to be what matters. Phoenix is going to be the city that dominates Arizona, and that ASU's role should be in that. So when he becomes president of ASU, it has somewhere between 500 and 600 students. And he dies at the end of 1959, and it has about 18,000 students at that point.
And he was president until then?
Yeah, he died as president.
Oh, okay.
So now we'll go and catch up my mother, because they did not obviously come at the same time, based on what you've heard so far. So my mother was from Ohio, had gone to a small college in Ohio called Heidelberg, same name as the great German university, but not the same place by a large measure, and wants to be a dean of women. Gets a degree in counseling, gets a master's degree from Syracuse, actually starts working on a PhD at Northwestern at some point, but never finishes it. And from there moves into a series of deanships, associate deanships kinds of things at Kent State in Ohio, and at Lake Forest College outside of Chicago, in Lake Forest. She takes a job as, I'm not clear if it was Dean of Women or Associate Dean of Women or what the job was exactly in Flagstaff at what was then Arizona State College, Flagstaff, the T having been dropped. And that's got to be about 1945 or 6. She worked for the USO during the war, running USO posts, because she was sort of an administrator of things. And after the war, I guess she goes to Flagstaff. I remember her talking about packing up her red Chevy in Ohio and moving to Flagstaff. Maybe Lake Forest comes after Flagstaff. My parents were married in the chapel at Lake Forest College. So that may be right. But anyway, she's at Flagstaff after my father has left there. And there is an opening for a Dean of Women in Tempe. And my father interviews her.
And what was her first name?
Catherine.
Catherine.
Her maiden name was Catherine Klink. And turns her down for the job. Again, as I've been told the story over the years, he writes her a letter saying, Dean Klink, I very much enjoyed interviewing you. You were charming. I think you'll have a wonderful career, but I think you're just too young for this job. I guess it must be then she goes to Lake Forest. She must have been in Flagstaff before. And she had great stories to tell about living in Flagstaff. She and a friend of hers would drive down to Oak Creek Canyon in the 40s and stay at Mayhew's Lodge. There were 3 significant lodges in the canyon in those days. Call of the Canyon, Todd's, which became Garland's, and Mayhew's. And Mr. Mayhew had 2 pianos, and she and her friend were very good pianists, and they would play late into the night in the lodge in Oak Creek Canyon, playing the piano. So anyway, my father is then sent to Germany after the war to help rebuild the school system, and is traveling back and forth. He was he was too old to be in World War II, literally. I mean, he was born in 1892. And so he helps rebuild the school system in Germany. I have this unbelievable punch bowl he acquired. I should show a picture of this thing. It is, he bought, post-war in Germany, if you had American cigarettes, you could get all kinds of stuff, apparently. So it's this sterling silver punch bowl with encrusted Prussian war helmets in the top of it. That was a punch bowl given by the Kaiser to generals in the army on the occasion of their 50th anniversary. And he got this thing, and it sits in my living room, and every so often I look at it and think, what an odd thing, but it's kind of interesting. Anyway, he goes to Germany to help rebuild the school system, and is flying back and forth through Chicago. And so that must be right, that Lake Forest is after my mom was in Flagstaff. And he writes to her, inquiring as to whether or not she would meet him for a drink at the Palmer House. And he's apparently remembered her from the interview, and perhaps other contact, I'm not sure. And she writes back and says, well, President Gammage, I'm not sure I'll recognize you. I'd be glad to meet you, but I'm not sure I'll recognize you. And he writes back and says, don't worry about it, I'll recognize you. And they meet, and ultimately they get married. And then she comes back here. There is a videotape, which I have, of a film which was made when my mother arrived to meet my father after they had gotten married. And it is labeled as one of the first live news broadcasts, I guess, that was done by a Phoenix Railroad TV station, of her arriving at the station in downtown Phoenix to meet him. And I haven't looked at it in years.
So she had never been married before?
She had not been married, no. And so she was 30, she's much younger than my father. He was born in 1892, she was born in 1915. Dixie had died. He brings her back here. He and Dixie had no children. And Dixie became fairly eccentric, is my impression, late in life. There's this notion that the house that I grew up in, which is now the Virginia Galvin Piper Writers House on the ASU campus, the old president's home, is haunted. And I'm the last person who ever actually lived in that house, the last living person, so I have a legitimate claim on being the ghost. But I think the ghost is Dixie, because she loved to wear hats, even indoors, and became an invalid, and a little, my impression is, a little wacky late in life, and sort of hung around on the second floor of that house. When I was born, my father was, what would that make him, 59, and my mother was about 36 or 7, and I'm an only child.
Wow. Oh, what delightful background. And so you grew up in Tempe.
Yeah, from when I was born in 51
Mm-hmm.
until my father died in December of 1959, we lived in that house,
Mm-hmm.
on the campus, on the ASU campus. And it wasn't isolated like it is today. In those days, the whole area where the ISTB, Interdisciplinary Science and Technology buildings, there are like 4 of them there, and the biotech stuff, and the old law school, and the honors college, all of that was a neighborhood of really very nice little bungalows, and my friends lived there. I went to 2 years of nursery school and 8 years of grade school on the ASU campus.
Okay.
The nursery school is still there. It's right next to the Lyceum. And where I went to grade school is where the music building is now. It was the campus laboratory school. And most of my classmates were the children of ASU professors or people who just lived in Tempe. And so most of my friends lived in that area or in the area just south of Apache, where there are still residences in Tempe. Yeah.
And where did you move after you left that house?
So when my dad died, we were in that house, and when H.K. Richardson was vice president. He was acting president for a period. I'm trying to remember when Harry Newbern comes in there, but Homer Durham is the next permanent president of ASU, and he was so nice to my mom. He told her to stay in the house as long as she needed to. I don't know the date when we actually moved out of the house. My mom then went back to work at ASU. She worked in the registrar's office doing student counseling, which was her background. She had not worked while my father was alive. She'd just been sort of the first lady at ASU. And ultimately she moves from the registrar's office to becoming director of gifts and endowments. So she's the first fundraising professional position at ASU. And the ASU Foundation, which is the fundraising arm of the university, had been started by my mom and dad initially as an agricultural endowment for the university, which is a weird, long story. Rooted again in the U of A. The U of A, when I was a kid, our lives largely revolved around problems created by the U of A. It was very clear that was the source of, and the rhythm of our house would change with an approaching regents meeting. You could just sense the tension rising over an upcoming regents meeting. So, and my father he'd always been kind of intrigued by real estate, which again I think is part of where I got. That's basically, I'm a real estate lawyer, and I've been a kind of a developer on occasion. And he and a couple of other faculty members had invested in real estate deals around the valley. Now this is Phoenix in the 1950s, when if you knew what you were doing, you could have made quite a bit of money in real estate. He did not. Professors, in my experience, tend to think that if you have a PhD, you're really smart and good at a lot of things. And my general perception is you're really smart and you may be good at some things, but you're not good at everything. And they did not make the best real estate investments. Not bad, okay, but not fabulous. And one of the things they had done was they actually had a small single-family home development right near Rural and Broadway, which was kind of the end of Tempe in those days. Tempe didn't go beyond Southern before 1960, really, except for some farming, not for subdivisions. And so they started a subdivision in there, probably 20 houses, 25 houses.
Do you know what it was called? It might not even have had a name. But
I don't know. No, I'm sure it did. And the home builder was a guy named Andy Watts, and it was probably some variation of University something, University Heights, University Acres, in those days you didn't name subdivisions ranch. That came when the subdivisions got bigger, then you used ranch. It's a period of time where you put in water and you called it lakes. But this was probably something like University Heights. And the street, the main street was La Rosa Drive, went down as far as Broadmoor, encompassed part of Granada, must be Granada, was next to it. And there were a series of models. And one of the things, they also built some houses up at Shea and Scottsdale Road, where they were way too early. Shea and Scottsdale Road is like center of Scottsdale now, but in those days it was the hinterlands, and the houses did not sell. But we would drive on a Sunday, we would go and look at these various subdivisions and look at the houses. And so my mom bought one of those houses after we moved off campus. And when we had lived on campus, we had always had a live-in cook, nanny, various series of people, ending with a really wonderful woman that I called Granny growing up, paid by the university. And she did the cooking. My mom was not domestically inclined.
And she probably took care of you or spent
and took care of me, and was just a wonderful human being. And when my mom moved off campus and went to work back at ASU, she hired Granny to come with us. And so I grew up with two women running the house.
And do you know her given name?
Yeah, Ethel Wheatley. This is interesting. I have a cabin down the road from Camp Tonazona. Part of what growing up in Tempe to me was also Camp Tonazona. So my dad had acquired Tonazona for the university, and the idea had been to find a place where biology and life science teachers at ASU could teach school teachers about teaching the life sciences in the natural environment, sort of outdoor STEM education, we would call it today. And he was talked into this by a guy named Martin Mortensen, who was just this really cool, very tall, skinny, old guy. I remember him well, and I see him as John Muir, right, in my vision. And they had acquired Tonazona, and so we would go there, and my father would occasionally have the university development people who were building buildings on campus feverishly in those days over-order things and ship them to Tonazona to build stuff. That's the sort of thing that would get you, would create a scandal today to be written up in the newspapers, but nobody was paying attention. And when he died, again, the university, they knew how much I loved going up there, and said to my mother, President Durham said to my mother, feel free to take Gigi. We have to fess up to the fact that I was raised being called Gigi. I was not wild about that. We can talk more about that. It made sense because I'm a junior, and they didn't want to call me Junior, which I appreciate, but Gigi was not. That was in the era when a movie came out with Leslie Caron, Gigi.
Oh, yeah.
And that turned Gigi into being too feminine for my taste. I was never called that by my friends or teachers. It was.
Did they call you Grady?
Yes, they all called me Grady. My parents and my parents' friends all called me Gigi. And I've come to, I like it now. I'm good with it, but for a long time I wasn't. Anyway, she went down, the first time we went up to Tonazona to stay, Frank Hirsch and the football team were there. And the cabin we were supposed to stay in was occupied by them. And Hirsch saying, "Oh, Mrs. Gammage, I'm so sorry. Please feel free to move." But she felt so bad having made the team move that we went down the road and found a cabin for sale that I still have, that I've added on to 3 times. I just built another cabin next door, so I have a family compound up there. But this cabin was $8,000. It was like half an acre of land and a cabin on the creek, free-flowing stream right next to it for $8,000. Well, my mom didn't have $8,000. So Ethel Weekly, Granny, who lived with us, who had been a farmer's wife in Illinois and had then gone to hotel school thinking she was following a daughter and son to Arizona. And she came to ASU looking to be a head mother in a fraternity house, which was how it worked in those days, the days of in loco parentis. And wound up working in our house. So she frankly had more money than my mother did. So she said, "Well, I'll loan you the money." So I actually have the deed from the people who owned this cabin to Ethel Weekly, and my mom paid her back over the course of a couple of years to buy this cabin, which I still go to every weekend in the summer. So.
Oh, wow, that's a great story.
Yeah,
Wow.
Granny, I still think of her as Granny, was really a major part of my life as a kid.
So when you moved to the second house, Broadway and rural, what schools did you go to, or what activities were you involved in school?
So that would be the catchment area for Broadmoor School, but I was still going to school at ASU.
Oh, okay.
I was at the campus lab school throughout that period. Most of my friends went to Broadmoor and then to McCamey, the junior high, but I stayed at various times. It was called the campus lab school, the Payne training school, named for Ira D. Payne, who was dean of the education college, I guess. Until I went to Tempe High School. So I'll tell you some Payne training campus lab stories. So there was only one class in each grade, 1 through 8, and basically 28 kids per class as you walked through and it was designed to train teachers. And so at any given point in time in the classroom, you would usually have the permanent classroom teacher who more often than not was also a professor of education in the education school. And you'd have 3 or 4 student teachers in the classroom with 28 students. And each classroom had a one-way mirrored wall in it, behind which 20 students could sit and watch a class being taught.
Wow.
And there were microphones placed around the classroom so they could drop in on conversations going on. And we got every new gimmick that came out in education was tried out on us. So we got phonics, and we got unusual foreign language experimentation, and we got every new classroom textbook that came out would be tried on. We'd even get experimental desks. We had desks that would flop apart and go in different ways, and various kinds of free-form, self-directed student learning experiments. And if you were a smart kid, which was a pretty high percentage of the class because these were the children of professors, it was fabulous. It was great. If you were an average kid, you got kind of left behind. And I had friends that I think suffered for the experimentation that took place in our classroom. I thought it was great. I liked it a lot. And then I went to Tempe High School.
Mm-hmm. And at Tempe High, do you have any favorite teachers or activities you were involved in? And then when did you graduate from there?
So I graduated from Tempe High in 1969. I had a bunch of teachers that I remember fondly. I tell people that Harry Mitchell was my high school civics teacher. It's not really true. Harry Mitchell's a dear friend from the time when he was mayor of Tempe, and after that in Congress, I chaired his first campaign that he lost for superintendent of public instruction. I chaired his first campaign for Congress that he won. He's just a wonderful human being, and I commonly refer to him as my high school civics teacher because he was the high school civics teacher. But the truth is, there were two tracks for high school civics. And the Smart Kid track was not Harry's track. It was taught by a woman named Lita Boyer, who had been there for a long time, and it was actually economics. In addition to civics, you got economics. It was a great class. I really enjoyed it. And I mostly got to know Harry because he drove the bus for every activity you went on. To pick up extra income. And because he had grown up learning how to handle heavy equipment, his father worked for the railroad, he had a chauffeur's license, and he would drive the bus when the National Honor Society went on a picnic or went on a field trip, and I mostly got to know Harry that way. One of my favorite teachers was Louise Lamberts, whose husband was an ASU, I believe, English professor, J.J. Lamberts. And she was the Latin teacher. My mother had, for a time, thought she was going to be a Latin teacher, and so she encouraged me to take Latin. And Latin, you had to take some kind of foreign language. Latin's not particularly useful in the conversational sense, certainly. But it was a great class. For somebody who became a lawyer, it turned out to be kind of useful because I actually have to teach phrases like sic utere tuo ad alienum non laedas. That is the principle of nuisance law in American life. And Mrs. Lamberts was just a fabulous teacher. There was a chapter of the State Junior Classical League, which is the association of all the Latin students in Arizona. It was a national association in those days. And we'd wear togas and put on plays. We joked to people about having toga parties. They were not Animal House toga parties. They were just, we'd recite the Aeneid and we'd do all kinds of stuff. And I actually did so much of that, I actually wound up being state president of the Junior Classical League. So I was the head Latin student in Arizona for a year period of time. There was a very eccentric English teacher named Mr. D. His name was actually De Munbrun, I think, but nobody ever called him that. We called him Mr. D. And it amazes me as we, in current times, live through the scrutiny of what kind of books and things students are going to be allowed to read. We read Lawrence Ferlinghetti, we read Allen Ginsberg's Howl, we read Walt Whitman, we read, stuff that my guess is would be banned in Texas these days. He lived down the street and around the corner from me, and he was a very demanding. I mean, he was the sort of emblematic high school teacher that they would make movies about, you know, because he was, he'd yell at students and demand them to perform up to a level. And, yeah, so that was good. There was you know, I liked high school. I liked the classes in high school. I didn't like the social part of high school very much. It was just, I wound up being class president junior and senior year, partly because my mom was worried I was not doing enough activities and I needed to get into college and whatever. And I was not like a jock or you know, the kind of people who are popular in high school, except for the fact that I was funny. I was able to talk to an assembly of students and get them to laugh about stuff. Turned out to be hugely valuable, still hugely valuable to me, that I can be funny. Mm-hmm. And so that got me elected senior class and junior class president. I was not student body president, I was class
Did
president.
you work in high school, or what did you do after high school?
I did not work when I was in school. I worked summers, mm-hmm. and I had 2 different summer jobs. The first 2 summers I was in high school, I worked for the First National Bank of Arizona, which the president of that bank, which is, you know, through a series of mergers, no longer exists, but was a guy named Ed Carson, who had been student body president at ASU when my father was president. And so he was a friend of my mom's, and she got me a job. One summer these are not typical summer jobs for high school students. I got to work in the investment analysis department and write reports on stocks and bonds. I didn't know much, but okay, it was kind of cool. One summer I was more of a more typical kind of gopher job, keep the Xerox machine running. Xerox machines in those days were about half the size of this conference room we're sitting in, and very noisy and broke constantly. Mm-hmm. And then the last 2 summers in high school, I had joined an explorer post. I was big on the Boy Scouts, so I was an Eagle Scout. When I was in 8th grade, I got my Eagle Scout. And as someone who grew up without a father, the Boy Scouts were really important to me. It was kind of learning about male bonding and learning how to camp and hike and cook in the outdoors and the lot. It was really valuable to me. And so after I got my Eagle Scout in 8th grade, and was assuming I would leave scouting behind. Explorers is like the last part of scouting. Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Explorers. And Explorers is more vocational in character, and there was an Explorer post that was designed for people who wanted to be engineers. And it was sponsored and run by the Silver Project. I did not want to be an engineer, and I knew it at the time. I'm not a math guy, I'm a word guy. And so I didn't want to be an engineer. But it was pretty cool. Silver Project treated us like royalty, and you got summer jobs. And so I had 2 jobs, Silver Project jobs in the summer. One summer I worked in operations analysis, which was examining how to make SRP more efficient in various ways. And one of my jobs was to inventory the motor pool. They have a lot of vehicles. And I got to go all over the state looking at vehicles and writing down the license number of a truck and entering it into a database. And I discovered I guess this is long enough ago it's okay to say this. SRP had bought like a dozen pickup trucks and parked them on some property and forgot they had them. And they just sat for a while. And I found them, and I was like, I thought I would be a hero, and it was more like, oh God, how are we going to explain this? That we have these trucks that we haven't been using. Working in a big corporate environment was an interesting experience for me, because I've never had that again. Law firms are very different than a corporate environment, so I never had that experience.
Still really interesting skills and experiences.
Yeah, and it was great, just the routine of working in a place like that, and I mean, sometimes it's like the sitcom The Office, but a lot of the time it's not. It's very serious, productive, interesting work.
So by the time you finished high school, did you know you wanted to be a lawyer, or what did you go on to get your bachelor's degree in?
You know, I always, in some senses, I kind of emulated my father's high school career. I did debate and extemporaneous speaking and stuff in high school, and debate, and I liked that. It was fun, and I would be the master of ceremonies at most of the pep rallies and that kind of stuff. And I liked that kind of performing. So I felt like law was a logical kind of thing, and my mother had really wanted to be a lawyer. The Chevy that she drove out from Illinois to come to Flagstaff, she named Portia after the Merchant of Venice, the woman lawyer. So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. I wound up, I did not want to go to ASU. I'd never been a student at ASU. All three of my kids went to ASU. But I wanted out. I wanted away. And the pink building was a big part of that. We haven't talked about that whole piece of my childhood, but I broke ground for Gammage Auditorium. It created a degree of visibility and expectation that I wasn't comfortable with. Now, it was bad enough that my mother was a larger-than-life figure who expected a lot from me. I tell people, you know, if I brought home a report card that was anything less than straight A's, she would say, "Oh, that's nice."
And you knew.
She knew exactly how to twist her tone of voice to just really get the message across. Very subtle. I wrote a foreword to a book that my mother, late in life, developed Alzheimer's, and I had to hire a companion to be with her. And Sally Y, this companion, and my mother collaborated on a book of my mother's stories about her life. And I wrote a foreword to the book, and I said that I thought both she and Sally were members of the Order of the Bene Gesserit, which is the women in Dune, in Frank Herbert's science fiction, who can control other people with the tone of voice.
Oh.
And she could really do that. So that was bad enough, was that expectations. Layered on top of that, the constant presence of this building. I just made what was a very good decision, that my mother supported, fully supported.
Well, that's good.
That I needed to go away to college and not go to ASU. And it was also the case, candidly, in 1969, when I graduated from high school, ASU was not the institution it is today. There was nothing like the Honors College. Mm-hmm. It was primarily a commuter school. Most students didn't live on campus. Mm-hmm. And I was a really good high school student, so I could go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I wound up going to Occidental College in Los Angeles, which is a small liberal arts college. I had an absolutely fabulous experience there. It was the size of Tempe High School, almost exactly the same size when I was there. Much bigger campus, very different feel, So, and I love being in LA. I had thought of going east. My guidance counselor really wanted me to go to Princeton. And we went on a big college trip that my mother took me on, and the East was too foreign to me, having grown up in Tempe. California, I was like, okay, this feels okay, this feels comfortable. And I really kind of thrived in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a very fascinating place. I was into architectural history and things in those days. I think growing up on the ASU campus and my dad being president and being so interested in building the campus really got me started on architecture and buildings and real estate development and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, developing whole love for
And
that.
LA is a slice of the architectural history of the United States that is unmatched in many ways.
Wow, that's interesting. So after you finished your undergraduate, then where did you go? Did you go right to law school?
I did. I regret that. I tell people not to do that. I tell people to take some time off in between. But I did, so then I went to Stanford to law school. Again, went through the agony of thinking I should go east. Got admitted, flirted with going to Yale. New Haven just looked kind of
Chilly. No.
chilly, overcast, gray, bleak, depressing. And so I went to Stanford. Again, law school's not fun at all. To the extent it can be fun, Stanford's probably the best place in the United States to go. And had a great experience. And then came straight home after that and started practicing law.
And did you start the firm that you have now?
Yeah, when I came home, I went to work for a firm called Jennings, Strauss and Salmon. That's an old line, big firm downtown that represents the Silver Project, interestingly. And I wound up doing a lot of work for the Silver Project.
And that's probably some of your interest in water.
Yes.
Water rights.
So I went to work for Jennings Strauss and was there for about 7 years, and then we started Gammage and Burnham in 1983 and been there ever since.
And did you want to talk about the pink building as you refer to it?
Yeah, there is.
And that's Gammage Auditorium for
Yes,
people that
yeah,
might not
yeah.
know what you're referring to.
There is an apocryphal story that I'm not sure is true, but I've told it so many times it has become true. That's what happens. And about Frank Lloyd Wright and my father collaborating on Gammage Auditorium. So when I was a kid, my father had gotten to know Mr. Wright. We refer to them as friends. It is not clear to me that Frank Lloyd Wright had friends in the conventional sense of the word, because he didn't think anyone was his peer. He was a difficult and arrogant man. Genius, but difficult and arrogant. Mm-hmm. And but we would go to social events at Taliesin a lot. And I don't remember most of those events when my father was alive. After Mr. Wright and my father both died in 1959. Wright died a bit earlier than my father did in 59. And after their deaths, my mother and Olgivana Lloyd Wright, his widow, really were friends. Olgivana was an interesting and unusual person. I always tell people, read the book The Fellowship, if you want to know about what it was like to live in Taliesin in those days. Very odd. We'd go to these events at which Ivana, Wright's daughter, would put on a modern dance recital, or a musician would play, and it was sort of an assembled group of people from Phoenix. Henry Luce, who owned Time magazine, would be there. William Benton, the publisher of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and the ambassador to the Court of St. James would be there and different things. But anyway, so my father, the auditorium at ASU from its early days had collapsed sometime in the early 50s. I don't remember that building. It's where the Durham building is now. The Durham building has just been rebuilt. And so there was no big auditorium in which the students could assemble, and that was a missing element. And my dad wanted to have Wright do a building on campus, so they had started talking about it. And the apocryphal story is that Wright shows up to meet my dad to walk around campus and talk about where the building should go, and that I am probably at age 6 or 7 at that point, maybe 7, playing with blocks on the floor of our living room there in what is now the Virginia Galvin Piper Writer's house. And that Wright stands for a few minutes, and he did not like children, I think, at all, and watches me. And when my father comes to collect him to go walk around campus, Wright turns to my father and said, "I have been watching your son, and your son will never be an architect." So I became a lawyer. And I took his advice to heart. I have no idea if that's really true or not. It's a good story. I kind of like it.
It is a good story.
And so then they go out and they walk around campus, and whether it was on that trip or some other trip where the other better known apocryphal story of Wright and Gammage Auditorium is, they get to that site on the curve of Apache Boulevard, and at that point, there are students living there in Quonset huts, post-war GI village kind of thing. And Wright says, the building should go here, it should say welcome, and puts out his hands, knowing that back in his studio, he has an opera house he designed to go on an island in the Euphrates River in Baghdad that has these arms that go out. And being a shrewd businessman, thinks I can dust off those plans and make some changes, and we can build it in Tempe. And that's the origin story of Gammage Auditorium. Wright then dies sometime in 59. My dad dies in December 59. They're planning it. They're trying to get the building done. A group of civic leaders in Phoenix, Lewis Ruskin is the one I remember the most, sort of come together to lobby the legislature for the building to be built. There are all kinds of stories and books that have been written about that. William Wesley Peters, who was Wright's son-in-law and became chief architect at Taliesin after Wright's death, and a guy named John Rattenbury, whom I remember really well, modify the plans for the Baghdad Opera House to make it Gammage Auditorium. They take off lots of embellishments on the outside that would have been there, and basically add the music school to the back of it. So when you see Gammage Auditorium from the air, it's shaped like a figure 8. The back half is the music school, the front half is the auditorium. I get to break ground. There's this photo that everybody always sends me and sees of me and my mom and Olga Lana Lloyd Wright and Homer Durham, the president of the university, and William Wesley Peters, and a guy named Robert McKee, who's the general contractor for the building, who came from El Paso to build the building, and me standing in front of all of them with my little gold shovel turning over the first shovelful of dirt. The day that happened, one of my best friends in grade school, a guy named Charlie Henry, who lived on 13 acres of orange groves on Baseline, where the entrance to the Arizona Grand, or what used to be called the Point South Mountain, is, had this really cool sort of compound of citrus and a big swimming pool and an old kind of manor house, was having a swim party for my class. And I had to put on my suit and tie and turn over the first, and I just wanted to be at the swim party. And so as soon as I was done with the shovel full of dirt, somebody picked me up. My mom stayed, and I got to go to the swim party.
Well, I'm glad you got to at least go. That would have been a memory to miss that. There's no escaping your connection to Gammage Auditorium. Your name, is on the building. So
yeah, more other stories that I've told like 1,000 times. But after I came back here to practice law, I was very glad I'd gone away. When I got to Occidental, I expected complete anonymity and sought complete anonymity. But I became conscious of the fact that the dean of students there knew there was this big building in Arizona that I had the same name. And also in my class at Occidental was a guy named Howard Amundsen, Jr. And there is a big building, not as big as Gammage, frankly, called the Amundsen Pavilion in LA. Well, Howie Amundsen, who became a good friend of mine at Occidental, his father owned Home Savings and Loan, the largest savings and loan in the United States. He was a billionaire, even back in those days, in the 70s. When Howie turned 21, it made it into the Wall Street Journal because it was a shift in the ownership and control of the largest savings and loan in the United States. So we threw him in the fountain at Occidental. The dean of students, because of the big pink building, assumed that I was kind of like Howard Amundsen, that I was going to be a major contributor to Occidental College at some point in life. I've been a minor contributor, but not. And I remember saying to him, to the dean, I'm not like Howie. My parents are like you. They're college administrators. We don't have big money. And he was like crestfallen, but he still treated me like royalty. It was great. So when I came back here to start practicing law, I had been used to being away from the sort of omnipresence of that building looming over my life. And I would call people and tell them my name. And people would say things to me like, "Oh, that's interesting. Were you named after the building?" Like, you think people randomly name children after buildings? Or are you related to the building? To which I always wanted to say, yeah, but I'm just a Circle K. The best response I ever got was I called someone and I said, "Would you tell Mr. So-and-so that Grady Gammage called?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, right, and I'm Turf Paradise." So it sort of, the reasons I had left sort of came back to me for a while. And I was always conscious of the feeling that it was opening doors for me that other people would not have opened for them. But I had a high enough opinion of myself that I thought, like, that's okay. I'll do a good job anyway, and it'll be fine.
And it's clear you have a wonderful sense of humor, so it's not a bitterness.
It's not.
Embracing.
Yeah, it took a while, and it's interesting how much it's changed over time. So the building was christened Grady Gammage Memorial Auditorium, and for a very long time, people used Grady Gammage as the name of the building. We're going to a performance at Grady Gammage.
I've said that.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And my mother was not happy at all
Sorry.
when the name of the building began to shift. It's now in everything ASU produces called ASU Gammage.
Oh.
Everything you see, you will never see Grady Gammage Memorial Auditorium. It then became, for a while it was called Gammage Center for the Performing Arts, and then it became ASU Gammage. And I think that happened after Colleen got here. Colleen Jennings Rogensack runs the building, and it's fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
And some people just refer to it as Gammage.
As
I picked up
Gammage.
a student yesterday, and I said, "I'll pick you up
Yes,
in the Gammage
but
parking
just
lot."
use the
Yeah.
single name. My mother didn't like that at all. She wanted my father's full name to be used, and she wanted it to be Grady Gammage Memorial Auditorium, and she would have been okay with it being shortened to Grady Gammage. I feel differently about that. I'm fine with it just being ASU Gammage or just Gammage. because I recover a little bit of the anonymity that I lost when the building's name was the exact same as mine.
And of course, you're never going to escape it. That people will ask if you're related or named after. Or
Yes, although it's interesting how that
always.
has diminished over time. As Phoenix has grown, it used to be when I'd give somebody a credit card, they'd say, "What's the deal?" And that happens 1 out of 100 times anymore. It's just, it's not as instantly visible to people as it once was. And that's fine, that's okay. It's a much bigger city now than it was in the 60s.
Can you share with us about your marriage, and do you have children?
Yeah, so my wife and I met at Occidental, she came back here with me. We graduated from Occidental in '73. We got married, and she would visit me off and on when I was at Stanford. We got married after I graduated. We got married the week after I took the bar exam in 1976. She taught for the Tempe School District. She taught at Rover School. We lived in the Lakes, and she taught second grade for 6 or 7 years, I guess. Even taught for a while after we first had kids. I have 3 sons, twins, who are now 38, and another son who is 35, I'm thinking. I don't know. It's hard to keep track. And they all live here. They all went to ASU.
You did say that.
2 of the 3 are married. 1 is not married. The youngest one who's married has a granddaughter.
So your grandpa.
So yeah, I have 4 grandchildren now. The older one of the twins is married, one of the twins is not. The twin who is married has a little boy. The granddaughter and the little boy from the different families are 2 months apart in age, coming up on 3 this year. And then my older son with the little boy just had twin granddaughters, who are 5 months old, I guess.
Oh, and how fun that they live close.
Yeah, we see them all the time.
Oh.
One of them, that son, the son with the 3 grandchildren, lives at Broadway and Mill in Tempe, right by Tempe High School.
And I forgot to ask, what is your wife's name?
Karen.
Karen. And so...
Which I might just put in an editorial that she is extremely annoyed that the name Karen has taken on this connotation of being the sort of bitchy person who asks to see the manager. She thinks that is unfair. It is unfair. She's a wonderful person who would never do such a thing. And why Karen was singled out as the name, partly it's generational, but there are lots of names from that generation that one could pick on rather than Karen. So.
Well, and thankfully I think hopefully everyone knows Karens that they love and appreciate, or family.
I hope that's right.
So, are there places in Tempe, whether it's businesses or restaurants, places you buy things from or dine at, that you have enjoyed over the years, or that were once here that are gone now that you miss? What are maybe some changes?
Boy, the changes in Tempe are really stunning. Just in the last decade, it has remarkably transformed. And much of that transformation has been facilitated by me and my law firm. We represent most of the big developments that have taken place on the Tempe Town Lake or in the downtown area. What we do, one of our principal specialties, is seek development approvals, which is usually thought of as a rezoning, for people to build stuff. And we did that on the Hayden House site, which we all used to call Monty's. Monty's had closed before that all got done. We did it years ago on the Tempe Mission Palms Hotel, which resulted in demolishing a lot of the older parts of Tempe. And I've spent a lot of time as a historic preservation advocate as well, which is somewhat inconsistent with my representation of big developments. It's in some measure an effort to atone for tearing stuff down. I have mixed feelings about the number of high-rises that have been built in downtown Tempe. I would, and I told the mayor and council this, several mayors and councils this on occasion, I would have kept the height limits lower along Mill Avenue and in the area between the Butte and the university. High-rises along the lake I think were fine, but I would have tried to make that area south of that feel more like Georgetown or Greenwich Village, which is to say 5 or 6 story buildings, not 20-story buildings. I built a building that I was at this morning, which I've since sold, but I still have an office there at the corner of College and 5th Street or University. It right now you would recognize it most by the sign that says Mr. Fry's Man. There's a French fried restaurant on the bottom of it. That was not my idea. That was done by the current owners, which is University Realty, an affiliate of the ASU Foundation. And it's a 4-story black steel glass with a terrace on the top. It's a very cool building. It won a ton of architectural awards. I'm very proud of it. I sold it partly because I was tired of being a landlord, partly as sort of estate planning, and I kept my office there for a period of time. So I love hanging around and walking around that area. I'm really bummed about the closing of House of Tricks. I saw it coming. I knew it was going to happen. I think part of the mistake Tempe made was in being so aggressively willing to zone for high-rise buildings. And as I say, we represented many of these. But what happens when you do that without any guidance as to what the limit should be is you telegraph to every single property owner that their property is worth $500 a square foot or whatever the going rate for a 20-story building is. And so they hold out for that and they expect that to happen and they pay that, in this case, to Robert and Robert Trick, who are wonderful people and deserve every bit of money they're getting and wanted to retire, but it's just really tragic to see. I love the atmosphere there. Mm-hmm. And we could have preserved more of that in Tempe than we have. There's not going to be much left of that. There are pieces of the ASU campus that survive. I had an argument with Michael Crow about this one time. He said in some meeting I was in that, well, if we really had our way and enough money, we'd probably tear down everything built before 1970 or 75 on the campus because it's just not. Well, no, don't do that. I think he would have exempted Gammage Auditorium. It's a National Historic Landmark, but one would hope. But there's a lot of stuff. Even the weird, somewhat plain architecture of the 1950s is worth preserving because it speaks of the time that the old administration building at ASU is an example. Pieces of the Memorial Union are an example. They speak of a time and they communicate what the campus was like. The history of, I have a whole talk I could do on this subject, but campus design is interesting. And the contrast between a place like Stanford and ASU is so dramatic. Stanford is the imperial legacy of a robber baron. Leland Stanford was one of the richest men in America. His son dies unexpectedly in Italy on a broad, coming of age kind of experience, and decides to create a university to make the children of California our children, and hires Frederick Law Olmsted to lay it out, and Charles Atherton Coolidge, the two luminary architects of America in those days, to design a monument, and it springs up full blown in that sense. Then there's kind of the land grant experience, like the U of A, where they got a bunch of land and an imperative from the government, rather than a robber baron, to teach agriculture and settle the West. And that the odd experience I was the contrast between ASU and the U of A earlier is, here you have all the agriculture is in Phoenix, and the land grant school to teach agriculture goes in Tucson, where there's no agriculture. Made No sense, but that's how we did things. And then you have ASU, which starts out as a tiny little one building normal school, and you know, scrambles its way up the ladder by incrementally becoming better, incrementally becoming larger, incrementally consuming Tempe and most of the older homes in Tempe. So a lot of the neighborhoods I remember from Tempe don't exist. But pieces of ASU do exist. And the thing that is, to me, the architectural hallmark of Tempe, of ASU rather, are the malls, the conversion of the street grid of old Tempe into pedestrian malls. That's the defining characteristic of the ASU campus, because it tells the story of not being a land-grant school, of not being a place like Stanford that can have a half-mile drive through palm trees while you see the university off in the distance. That's not the deal at ASU, and so those malls speak to me of all that. I have worked off and on for 5 different owners of the Hayden Flour Mill, and I think we finally have a deal that's going to happen to reinvigorate the flour mill, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah,
Would be
there's
a
a
very
lot of
good
people
thing.
excited about that.
It is now in the hands of local Arizona people. We've had multiple out-of-state owners try to make something big out of it. That whole concept was a mistake. The last owners that we represented, that were clients of mine, wanted to put a hotel in the silos. Unbelievably difficult, hugely expensive. I was very skeptical about it, but they really wanted to make it work. This is, I think, more about reinvigorating the ground plane with a series of interesting restaurants and spaces, and maybe a rooftop bar on the top of the flour mill. And that's probably about all they're going to try to do. And that's right. That's about what it should be. So I think that's very exciting. You know, I'm trying to think of other places that, you know.
Are there some favorite restaurants you go to if you just want to have lunch or dinner in Tempe? At the risk of
yeah, but are they historic? You know, not some. I like Cafe Boa in the old Casa Loma. The Casa Loma is a cool place. I would have put Trix at the top of that list. You know, the bars and restaurants in downtown Tempe are too much of a piece. They are all kind of bars. They're college town bars, and that's disappointing. It is disappointing that we don't have a broader range. Now, with the hotels that have been built now, and the Mirabella retirement community, we're going to have a different population of people in downtown Tempe rather than just students wanting to find the cheapest beer they can and shots. So that's hopeful. I'm hopeful. You know, we go to Postino's a lot. That's not historic. It's not an old place. It's a cool place to go in South Tempe. We live in Ahwatukee, so we don't actually live in Tempe anymore, but close by.
And how would you like your children and grandchildren to remember you? What would you like? You know, you have fond memories of your parents, and so it's fun to ask what you would like your kids.
You know,
and
I wrote
grandkids to think.
a foreword to Dean Smith's biography of my father. I get emotional on it. This I'm going to have a hard time saying. I'm not sure I can get through this. And what I said in it was, I thanked Dean for writing the biography because there were so many things in it I didn't fully understand and didn't know. And that the sense I got from there of my father, that he saw what ASU could become. He saw what Phoenix was becoming and what ASU could become was important. Here's where it gets.
I feel like Barbara Walters a little bit.
Yeah, really, I'm getting verklempt. But I ended it by saying, but none of that is really what I remember or what I care about. I can't believe how, as you get older, it is so much more difficult to control your emotions. That what I cared about and what I remember is not the things that made my father different, but the things that made him like every other father. That he would spend time with me, and that he would walk around the campus with me and tell me the names of the trees and teach me about the place. And that's what I want my kids to remember, is that kind of stuff.
And you can do that with your grandchildren now too.
Yeah.
Because they're close by.
And we can do it in Tempe, and we can do
Yeah.
it on the campus, or we can do it up at my cabin, which I talked
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Is there anything related to your life in Tempe, your work, your family, friends that I didn't ask you about that you would like to share?
So, I just came this morning from talking to a group of young real estate professionals about sort of the future of Arizona, and I suppose the parallel to my father's legacy that isn't about her average father stuff, that I would like my kids to remember is so I've written 2 books about Phoenix and is it sustainable and how does Arizona survive into the future. And I've written too many things to count about water and our water situation and our water future. And so, I kind of hope the kids and grandkids know about that. But what I want people both inside Arizona and outside Arizona to understand about this place is that there are a few things we have done really, really well. There are lots of things we haven't done well. We still have a chance because we're still young, because it's still a developing metropolitan area, because we still have a chance to build it. And because this place grew so big so fast, based on in-migration and sunshine and cheap houses, we have more of an ability to shape our environment in our city than almost anywhere around. And one of the things we've done really well is to understand the relationship between the desert and the arid environment and water, and how we use that to shape and grow a city. We've done a great job, but we are facing challenges that are bigger than we ever thought. So I wrote a study in 2011 about the water supply of the Sun Corridor and the future of the Sun Corridor, and then I rewrote it in 2021. And it's a lot worse in 2021 than it was in 2011. It's not an immediate crisis. The thing that people need to understand about our water situation, and I just wrote a thing in the Arizona Republic a week ago in response to a column Bob Robb did about this. The thing people need to understand is how long the horizons are. That we need to be thinking 30 to 50 years into the future. And that is just not something American politics are good at. And that worries me. I think the challenges of sustainability are not really challenges of climate or challenges of geography. They are challenges of politics. The important thing is, how do you deal with the challenges of geography and climate? And we were once very good at that. The Solver Project is an example of being good at that. The Central Arizona Project is an example of being good at that. We're not good at that now, and we have to recover that. We have to recover that sense that collective action expressed through government is necessary to solve problems.
And I know you have written extensively on this, and I think that there are some very many worthwhile articles to understand. I think for most people, we turn on the tap, we jump in the swimming pool, we water our yards without thinking about there being any limit or concerns. And some people are more conservative with their water use than others, granted. But my daughter lives in Austin. They just had a few days where they couldn't use their water. And she said, you know, it was really eye-opening to realize you can't wash your face, you can't brush your teeth unless you have bottled water.
And you
so,
know what I tell people about that? One of the students this morning when I was speaking to them at breakfast about this said, you know, I'm from Denver, and we're only allowed to wash our car on certain days. Why has that never happened in Arizona? I think there are 3 reasons that's never happened in Arizona. The first is we've been really good at it. We've never had that bad a shortage to deal with. And the main reason we've been really good at it is we store way more water than other places do, because we need to, because we have to. The second reason that we've never done that is, you know, we're basically libertarians at heart. We really don't like government ordering us to do anything. So we resist it as long as we can, and we try to deal with problems with education and pricing and anything other than imposed regulation. And the third reason is that the rest of the country often thinks of Phoenix as a giant demographic mistake, as a place where this many people should never have been allowed to live because it doesn't rain and there isn't enough water and it's just crazy for this many people to live in the desert. I think that's wrong. I think that's a wrong view, but there is a risk, I think, that we all feel to a degree, that if we impose draconian water restrictions, it'll make the front page of the New York Times. Whereas when Denver does it, it doesn't, because people don't have that view of Denver. When LA does it, LA has water restrictions more often than we do. But people don't think of LA as being an arid desert city. It is an arid desert city, but it has a big ocean. So it's, you know, so it seems different. And we don't want to feed that negative view of Phoenix.
And to your reference, the 30 years, the 50 years will get here. And so eventually, you know, we'll need to be prepared and reacting to that. So I appreciate what you've written, and you know, the more that people can become educated and maybe proactive and active in that. So
yeah.
we also like to open it up for anybody else to answer, and then I'm sorry, we could talk to you for hours because you're so interesting.
And I got a few minutes. I can say a little bit longer.
But we'll let anybody else ask a question.
Just a quick question about, you've been so involved in the community. What advice would you give to other people about why and how to get involved?
So one of the things I tell people about Phoenix is one of the greatest strengths we have is that you don't have to be named Gammage. You don't have to have old family connections. You don't have to be descended from Carl Hayden or Barry Goldwater. You can move to Phoenix from somewhere else, and 3 years later you might be in the state legislature. All you have to do is show up. There is no entrenched old boy network that tries to exclude newcomers from being involved. If there were, I'd know, because I'd be part of the old boy network that was doing that. That is not how we think here. Because this is a place built on in-migration, built on convincing people to come here from the Midwest or the East, or more recently California, with the promise of an open society and an ability to get ahead quickly. We like it that way. We want it to be that way. So, you know, these young students I talked to this morning, I said, you know, it's really easy to get yourself appointed to a planning commission at a city, and maybe that leads to running for city council if you feel like it, or to get involved in a trade organization and find yourself you know, an officer of a major trade organization in a hurry. There are a million different ways, and we're big on these kind of leadership programs: Tempe Leadership, Valley Leadership, West Valley Leadership. I did one of those a long time ago, at Valley Leadership, a very long time ago. I didn't learn much new, but I'd grown up here. But if you haven't, that's a great way to get connected and plugged into stuff. And you look at the people who run for office in Arizona, putting aside the fact that many of them are embarrassments, most of them are not old timers. They're not people who've been here a long time. They're people who can make a credible run for being elected to something.
Thank you.
Hi, Mikkel Keeney here. I just want to share a brief experience related to the other part of our sesquicentennial project that I showed you, the app for the Timby Relative Finder. Debbie knows the story a little better than I do, so you'll have to correct me if I don't get it right, but it's about Nancy, our friend Nancy, who, when she tried the app, she saw that she was related to your father, to Grady Gammage, and it changed the way she saw the Peak building.
Really?
She
Interesting.
lived here, took her kids past that building so many times and 2 performances there and so on and so forth. And once she had that discovery that she was 9th cousins or whatever it was with your father and could see who the common ancestor was, the next time she drove by Gammage after that, it was meaningful to her.
Oh, that's
because
cool.
she
And
felt
so
that
now I'm related to
connection,
Nancy,
so.
apparently.
Yes,
Yeah.
you are, yes.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
after my father came here from Arkansas, a number of members of his family followed him out. Many of them settled in Coolidge, and there were school teachers, and they owned a couple of gas stations in Coolidge and some other things. So yeah, but he was the first Gammage to come to Arizona, I think. And there's still not a lot of us.
Right. Thank you for coming to talk with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.